Number 10. Green Arrow. Green Arrow is sometimes known to take issue with Superman in the sense that he feels the hero is far too powerful to really connect with humanity, seeing him as somewhat dangerous and aloof. This makes some sense when you consider that Oliver Queen, in contrast to Superman, is very much a street-level superhero, quite literally a Robin Hood of sorts. Although there is irony in this kind of concern coming from Queen, considering that Ollie is also not quite your commonplace man of the people in regards to his station in life and usually, the vast wealth connected with his name. In Dark Knights of Steel, however, this criticism makes quite a bit more sense, with the medieval Green Arrow of this universe being a commoner in contrast to King Jor-El and his son Prince Kal-El, and this version of Ollie is not afraid to showcase his thoughts when it comes to the tyrannical hold he feels the House of El has on the kingdom. Oliver Queen coming for the royals. Number 9. The Flash. Hate might be a strong word to describe the tension between Superman and Barry Allen's The Flash, although if you know me, you know that for me hate is always a strong word. Instead, I would say these two have more of a rivalry, if you will, often racing one another, and with The Flash kind of gloating that he's simply too fast for Superman to catch. Barry's always like, no one can touch me, I'm the fastest man alive, which makes Barry somewhat of a perfect match, you'd think, for the Man of Steel. Of course, this claim hasn't always been true, has it? There are times the two have been forced to fight against one another, and Superman has actually managed to get his hands on Barry, or at least his finger. While it hasn't always worked out in his favor, especially if he's going up against Superman, the Flash sometimes feels as though his way of dealing with crime is somewhat superior to Superman's, or at the very least that it is somewhat oddly underappreciated by his fellow Justice League member Kal-El. Number 8. Martian Manhunter. What's Martian Manhunter's beef with Superman? Well, nothing super specific, to be honest. It's more like a hodgepodge collection of things that have contributed to some tension between the two superheroes over time. It's less the Martian Manhunter hates Superman, and more that they occasionally do butt heads. For the most part though, John Johns tends to be a pretty calm, cool, and collected type, and isn't prone to striking out against his colleagues. That's just not who he is. However, it also has been shown that he is somewhat jealous of Superman, and resents the love that people show for Clark over him. At least that seems to be what is implied when he returns as a Black Lantern after dying, as showcased during the Blackest Night event in issue number 44 of the 2005 Green Lantern series. It's like literally lifting buildings up and being like, I'm as strong as Superman. I don't know, seems like he's got some issues, but he doesn't want to talk about them when he's alive, only when he's a Black Lantern. Number 7. Booster Gold. Another hero who would probably be a lot less timid when it comes to his dislike of Superman, or rather the praise that Superman often gets in comparison, is Booster Gold. For Booster, his jealousy probably comes from more of a place of insecurity than Martian Manhunter's jealousy. I don't think John is necessarily insecure, but he's more like deep down, rightfully kind of frustrated that he's constantly living in the shadow of another alien superhero who he feels, he's on a similar level to. And honestly, while Martian Manhunter might not be as popular with comic book fans in comparison to Superman, based on what I know at least of his power set, I would agree. Booster Gold already comes with self-esteem issues right out of his origin. He became a hero in an attempt to redeem himself, so of course he's not going to be the most secure about his status as a hero. And add in the fact that he is often the butt of people's jokes in the DC universe and is not taken as seriously as a hero, and it makes sense that he'd have some disdain for Superman and all the love the hero receives by comparison. Number 6. Shazam. Typically Shazam, aka the formerly known Captain Marvel, aka Billy Batson, is often portrayed as someone who looks up to Superman, although that isn't to say that they don't have their moments where they do kind of compete against each other, because, as fans we like to be like, who's more powerful? In the Injustice universe though, despite following Superman, at one point Shazam also tries to act as a voice of reason when he actually kind of questions Superman's judgment. Seeing this as a challenge to his authority though, Superman reacts pretty dramatically by basically killing Shazam, focusing his heat vision on Shazam's eyes until his head basically melts. Sounds like a pretty terrible way to go, not gonna lie. Looks like a pretty terrible way to go in that comic too. Number 5. Hercules. Calling Hercules a hero is somewhat debatable. It kinda depends on which period in this history we're referring to. In the early days though, Hercules was definitely marketed as a hero. In fact, while I'm more familiar with him as somewhat of a villain in Amazonian history, he initially was portrayed as being a captive of the Amazons held against his will, who simply tricked Hippolyta into giving him her girdle so he might escape imprisonment. Although, then he also took it out on the Amazons, that whole thing, and that's a whole other thing. Even back then, he really did seem to hate the Amazons, although perhaps in that story with some good reason, since, you know, he was their prisoner. With Superman, his hatred of the hero came from a love of Lois Lane, when Hercules found himself transported to the future, Superman's present day in the 20th century. However, this brief encounter likely wouldn't be remembered by Hercules today, since he was kind of made to forget all about it when he traveled back to his own time. So yeah. But that was the thing, he loved Lois Lane for a minute. Number 4. Green Lantern. Guy Gardner once had his own series where he decided to actually pick a fight with Superman. And this actually wasn't the first time these two would fight either. For Guy, this was a rematch that he wanted because the last time they fought, Superman basically trounced him. Although we often know him as the hero Green Lantern, this was during a time when Guy was actually wearing a yellow ring, having powered up his ring through fighting Green Lanterns, which is how it seems to charge, at least here. Guy heads to Earth to fight against Superman. However, even Guy finds it challenging to commit to a battle against Supes. You see, right around this time, the Justice League was also kind of fighting Doomsday, so Guy ultimately heads to Earth to fight Superman, and then ultimately ends up joining in the fight against Doomsday. And, you know, if you've heard of the Death of Superman storyline, I think you know how that all goes. Not very well for almost everyone involved, because Doomsday is insane. Number 3. Wonder Woman. In the Superman Red Sun universe, Wonder Woman actually starts out as an ally of Superman's and even falls in love with him. So, where does it all go wrong here? In the Red Sun universe, we explore a world where Superman is actually an agent of the Soviet Union, having landed there instead of in America when he fell to Earth. Wonder Woman and Superman are involved in a relationship that is mainly fueled by politics, uniting both the strength of the Soviet Union with that of Themyscira and the Amazons. However, when Superman is taken prisoner by his world's Batman, Wonder Woman rushes in to save him. In the end, this rescue attempt costs her pretty dearly, with Wonder Woman being forced to break her lasso after being restrained by it, and therefore as a result losing her immortality and her eternal youth. Despite initially loving Superman, because of this, Wonder Woman's love turns to, well, kinda hate, and she never really fully forgives him for what happened to her as a result of his own capture. Number 2. Batman. Batman and Superman are often known for being best friends in the main continuity. I mean, Clark was asked to be Bruce's best man at his wedding. The wedding to Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, which of course ended up not really happening and getting called off, but still, this just goes to show how close the two of them are. So how could Batman hate Superman? Well, in an alternate reality known as Injustice, or Injustice Gods Among Us, full title, Superman ends up becoming a ruthless tyrant after losing Metropolis and his family, Lois Lane, and their future child together. What's worse was Superman was the one to take Lois's life, thanks to the machinations of Joker and Harley Quinn. This causes Superman to snap, killing the Joker and setting out to control the world in response, starting a full-out, unforgiving war on crime. Batman, however, in this universe, disagrees with Clark's approach, seeing him for what he is, a controlling and unforgiving tyrant, who has been basically driven mad with power as a result of his loss. This causes a divide between the two, with Batman gathering his own team to combat Superman and the heroes who follow him. Number 1. Black Canary. I forgot about this one, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's a good one. Also, thank you to Adam for the suggestion when I was asking for some folks to give me some ideas, because this list stumped me a bit. I was like, but everyone loves Superman. Except for me, I guess. I find Superman to be a little boring, but obviously I haven't read the right Superman stories, I think. Black Canary has some pretty big and honestly understandable beef with Superman in the Injustice universe. Like many heroes, Black Canary is one of those who stands against Superman, attempting at one point to help defeat him. And she actually does like pretty good too, I gotta say. However, unlike some of the other superheroes who rally against Clark in this universe, for Black Canary, her hatred of the Man of Steel is quite personal, because he took from her the one man she loved, Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, which also makes this battle between them like a lot more intense in a good way. Number 10. Superman. I mean, hate is a really strong word, especially if we're talking about the relationship between Clark and Bruce. However, you likely clicked for the hate, so it's kind of my job to give that to you. While Superman and Batman are generally like BFFs for life, even BFFs have those moments where they really question, you know, why they ever became friends in the first place. I know I've had those moments myself with my BFFs, and it turns out so have Bruce and Cal. There have been a few instances where Superman has really questioned Batman's judgment, and he even once voted to have him kicked off of the Justice League for just that. This was during Tower of Babel, though really Superman was more disappointed in Batman than anything else. I mean, I think most of the Justice League's members were, and as a result, Batman was successfully removed from the roster and his position as team leader. There is also, of course, a whole other universe where these two genuinely did come to hate each other. That is the Injustice universe, where Superman, in essence, became a dictator after being broken mentally by the Joker and kind of turned into a villain as a result of that. Batman refused to join Superman's side in this universe, making the two ultimately enemies. Number 9. Green Lantern John Stewart. Definitely one of the smaller moments, I would say, of hate on this list. John Stewart at one point was leader of the Justice League, which is awesome for him, but maybe, not so great for Batman, who for a long time has been known as the League's often de facto leader, and who kind of has a thing about always being in control, always needing to be in control. That's Batman for you. During John's time as leader in Justice League issue number 40, we see this struggle between these two, with Batman struggling to accept his role as a team member as opposed to a leader, and often questioning John's leadership and judgment, causing Green Lantern John Stewart in turn to question whether or not Batman should basically even remain on this team. Which honestly, to be fair, yeah, I'm kind of on John's side with this one. Batman shouldn't be undermining John. It's not very cool. Batman wouldn't like it if people were doing that to him. Number 8. Green Lantern Hal Jordan. Even in the main continuity, I would say that Bruce Wayne's Batman and Hal Jordan's Green Lantern are, kinda opposites. However, that doesn't mean they don't see eye to eye all the time. Many times they do, as they are both superheroes who, of course, are both out there fighting for justice. The difference is that Batman prefers to operate outside of the law and kinda in the shadows, whereas Hal literally wields light as a weapon for the law. He is the law as a Green Lantern, and on an intergalactic level, whereas Batman is honestly more of a street level superhero or vigilante, the polar opposite basically. However, there is a reality where their differences make it almost impossible for them to see eye to eye. Frank Miller's Earth 31. Here, Batman at one point gets Robin to help him paint an entire safe house yellow while sporting yellow versions of their suits and consuming yellow food and drink just to get Hal Jordan off of his case. The two even fight, with Batman using the color yellow to basically taunt Hal by exposing his weakness to it, which is also in stark contrast to the main continuity, where Hal before has even stated that Batman's fear tactics don't actually work on him, pretty much because he is such a powerful and unstoppable Green Lantern. Number 7. Peacemaker. While everyone might be focused on the end of the Blue Beetle trailer and what Hamy's uncle said about Batman, we actually do have some straight up hate from the DCU when it comes to heroes who actually hate Batman. So far, it actually isn't Blue Beetle or even Blue Beetle's uncle, although Blue Beetle's uncle is also not technically a superhero, I don't think, but it's Peacemaker and, maybe briefly Superman in the DCEU. Remember in one of the episodes of the first season of Peacemaker when Chris went on a whole rant to his dad's neighbor, basically calling Batman out as weak in comparison to himself as a hero? I remember that. That was some hate right there. Pretty sure Peacemaker pretty much hates everybody on the Justice League though. Number 6. Supergirl. Supergirl and Batman have pretty much always had a tense relationship, or at least a version of Batman and Supergirl have. This is also made more confusing by the fact that this Supergirl first appeared in a canonically debated series, I'd say, Superman/Batman by Jeff Loeb. While some things were incorporated into the canon from this series, some didn't quite fit with the rest of what was happening in the main continuity at that time. So although this series seems to be acknowledged as canon by pretty much all the wikis on the internet, it still has been a debated topic among fans. DC does this basically sometimes with series that are super loved. When asked if those stories are canon later by fans, they often answer them with the question of, well, what do you think? Should this be canon? So we kind of decide what's canon and what's not, and they kind of just take the bits and pieces that they like the most. And then from there, certain things are just incorporated into the canon. Like with Alan Moore's The Killing Joke and, what happened to Barbara there. Anyways, Batman and kind of newer Supergirl's beef comes from the fact that when she first arrives in Superman/Batman, she causes quite the stir after exiting her ship, which Batman finds in Gotham. Naked and confused, Kara wanders around and basically causes all kinds of destruction. Now add in the fact that Superman was initially believed to be the last surviving Kryptonian, Kara's anger issues, and the fact that she turns evil more than once, and it kind of makes sense that her and Batman would not get along. He kind of doesn't really trust her, and as a result, she kind of doesn't really like Batman. She's like, this guy is just a big jerky jerk and he doesn't get me. Number 5. Wonder Woman. Might be a shocking one for people that I put Wonder Woman at 5, but let me tell you about it. Wonder Woman and Batman are generally seen as, of course, being potential romantic interests for one another, as well as usually being depicted as like very close friends. So you know, it might surprise you to hear the hatred between them. Of course, this isn't really in the main continuity. Now there, they generally admire and respect one another, despite being very different heroes, I'd say. And despite the fact that Wonder Woman as an Amazon does not have any qualms with killing, unlike Batman, who that's like a huge no-no for Batman. However, even in the main continuity, they have had their differences, like in Greg Rucka's and J.G. Jones's Wonder Woman story, The Hecate, where the two are actually forced to fight over the fate of a woman who has sought Diana's protection. There are also other realities where their fighting has been much less incidental, which is kind of what we're focused on here, such as the reality belonging to Superman Red Son. Here, on what we know as Earth 30, Wonder Woman is in love with Superman, who here was actually raised in Russia, so he's a Russian Superman, and ends up being used as bait by the Russian Batman, who seeks to destroy Superman. During this fight, Wonder Woman is forced to break her lasso of truth, which causes her to basically age. While she resents Superman for this later on, it's fair to say that she would also probably hate Batman as well, as he was the one who incapacitated her in the first place. Number 4. Catwoman. It might seem odd to you for me to have Catwoman on my list for a few reasons. I mean, is Catwoman a superhero? And does she not love Batman? Well, I would personally argue that yes, she is a hero more often than not, at least in modern comics, and I would also kind of agree that yes, she does love Batman as well. However, that doesn't mean that she hasn't also hated Batman at the same time in the past. In fact, she literally has done that. Check out issue number 355 of Batman, where when Batman leaves her for Vicky Vale, she confesses to basically just that. Basically, like literally says, like, I'm in love with you, but I also hate you for kind of like what you did to me, you abandoned me. So, kind of classic Catwoman, I think. Bit of a love-hate thing they have going. Number 3. Spawn. Spawn and Batman had a team up at one point in the crossover issue Spawn/Batman from 1994. Not to be confused with their recent team up from 2022, Batman/Spawn. Very different, as you can tell from that title. And although this Batman definitely does not seem like our main continuity Batman, possibly because he's being written by Frank Miller here, he and Spawn both had a huge fight in this crossover, with both of them wanting to basically actively harm the other. Bury this. That's me throwing a batarang, because that happens at the end of the comic. Number 2. Rick Flag. Rick Flag Jr. is often known for his role in the Suicide Squad team, generally acting as their field commander on behalf of Amanda Waller. Initially, Rick respected Batman. Rick even offers a team up to the Dark Knight during a rescue mission to save Nemesis from a Russian prison, which they're both on with their own separate teams. Batman with Justice League International and Rick with the Suicide Squad. When Batman turns him down though, things quickly escalate and the two break out into a literal physical fight. It all starts with Rick trying to be like, Batman, don't walk away from me, let's have a conversation. And then it's like, nope, now we're fighting. Number 1. Green Lantern Guy Gardner. While alternate Superman might take the cake for hating Batman and a slew of other superheroes who stood in his way in the Injustice universe, I would say, like, honestly, if we're talking all the universes, it's one of the worst. This is, at the end of the day, an alternate reality still. So Guy Gardner is ranking much higher for the fact that the conflict between Batman and Guy was very real in the main continuity, and even at one point culminated in a fight between them. A one-punch fight too. Oh boy. Guy challenged Batman for leadership of the Justice League, took off his Green Lantern ring, and then was pretty much defeated in one punch by Batman. That'll probably make you hate someone. You know, at least for a while. Although I think Guy's over it at this point.
Coming in at number 10 is Daredevil and the Punisher. These two crime-fighting street-level heroes have been butting heads for a hot minute. As with a lot of pairings on this list, to say that they absolutely despise each other is kind of pushing it. Matt Murdock and Frank Castle respect one another, even if their philosophies to crime fighting are in direct contradiction to one another. Matt is a pretty devout Catholic. He's a lawyer. He believes in the criminal justice system, and he's got a pretty strict no life-taking policy, except for maybe like 3 instances that are pretty easy to justify. And then there's Frank. The criminal justice system not working is the very reason his family were taken from him. He believes the system to be broken and that his method of an eye for an eye, if you're a criminal you don't deserve to live, is ingrained into the whole philosophy of his hero activities. They couldn't be more different in terms of their morals, but running in the same circle and working in such close proximity to one another means that they are almost forced to work work together, and because of that, they have eventually learned how to work together, even begrudgingly. And even though one thinks this horned crime fighter is naive, and the other thinks his skull-themed colleague is a perversion of the system he fights for, they still find a way to make it work. Number 9. Green Arrow and Hawkman. The interesting thing about this somewhat surprising rivalry between two sometimes forgotten Justice League members, no offense to either, is that it's political. Other rivalries in comics are predominantly centered around modus operandi or love interests or personality differences, but this is just straight up that Green Arrow is pretty liberal and Hawkman, being either a centuries-old reincarnated warrior prince or a space cop, and sometimes both, is pretty damn conservative. The debates between these two heroes are pretty intense, and they've both been wrong and right in different instances, which makes for very interesting storytelling and dynamics. Oliver Queen has been paired up with a space cop before, talking Hal Jordan Green Lantern, and while they butted heads from time to time during their travels together, Arrow's vocalization of his political views never seemed to bother the Lantern as much as it bothers Hawkman. Green Arrow is the kind of guy to demand Aquaman opens Atlantis to democratic elections, and Hawkman has been dubbed the ultimate conservative. They just do not work. Number 8. Batman and Guy Gardner. I'm gonna be honest here, I think most of us are on Batman's side with this one. Batman has never really gotten along with Green Lanterns. I can't really tell you why because I don't know enough, so if you do know, share with us in the comments. But what I do know is that of all the Green Lanterns, Guy Gardner is known to be just the most unlikable. He's boisterous, cocky, a big old meathead, and he's got a stupid haircut. At first, Batman and Guy's rivalry was a bit of a joke, but then it pretty quickly changed to the point that only one hero was left as a joke. In 1987, we were given the Justice League International that had an awesome team of heroes including Shazam, Black Canary, Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, Martian Manhunter, among others, with Batman as their appointed leader. Most people would agree that Batman is a more than qualified leader for a team like this, but one person who didn't take too kindly to Batman's leadership position and even wanted the role for himself was Mr. Gardner. After going on a big old rant and Batman calling Gardner a mongrel, the Lantern takes off his ring and decides to challenge the Dark Knight to a battle of fisticuffs. One punch later, and the Lantern became the biggest laughingstock of the superhero community. Even Superman finds it funny. Number 7. Spider-Man and Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine doesn't really seem like a matchup you'd ever really expect. The funny thing is, they actually really work well together. Most of the time. It's really funny to see these two work together because you've got one of the most quippy, lighthearted, inspiring, and morally positive heroes teamed up with one of the most grumpy, rageful, animalistic, and brutal heroes in the Marvel landscape. The thing here is that while these two may clash, they're almost like brothers. Think like Wolverine as big brother and Spider-Man as little brother. Spider-Man and his snarky ways has a knack for getting under the skin of Wolverine's short temper. But I mean, we've also got instances of Wolverine hitting on Mary Jane, Spider-Man throwing Wolverine out of an Avengers tower window, and Wolverine being a little too stabby with his claws for Peter Parker's no-killing preferences. So they have definitely clashed and butted heads. And oh my god, there is also the Ultimate Universe versions of the characters who swapped bodies, with Wolverine being the most creepy creep ever to Peter's girlfriend. But for the most part, when these two heroes show up together, it's a treat. Number 6. Cable and Deadpool. Similar to Wolverine and Spider-Man, most of the times when Deadpool and Cable team up together, it makes for an entertaining read. Almost for the same reasons as Wolverine and Spider-Man 2, honestly. One smarmy guy who talks a lot, and one grizzled guy who talks very little. Always fun. But unlike those two, Deadpool was literally introduced as a villain specifically for Cable. In New Mutants number 98, Deadpool was hired by Tolliver to bring Cable down. The failure of this task put Deadpool on the warpath to try his darndest to bring this incredibly popular 90s hero down. They clashed multiple times, with Deadpool being one of Cable's constantly returning villains. As most people know, the hatred between these two characters didn't last forever, specifically ending when their respective series were cancelled and we were given Cable and Deadpool if looks could kill. Wade gets contracted by the One World Church to steal the facade virus, a new disease that turns everyone blue in order to achieve global equality, with the side effect of people melting. Cable is also fully aware of the virus and has the goal of destroying it, which puts the two heroes head to head. Deadpool eventually gets the upper hand on Cable and gives it to the Church, who turn around and infect both he and Cable with the virus just to test it out. Luckily, using his powers, Cable absorbs Deadpool into him, their genetic structure temporarily bonding. He vomits up Wade's essence, which heals back into his old body. Cable then uses his ship's teleportation matrix, which takes Deadpool along for the ride, and they appear in the same location, graphically bonded together before tearing themselves free of one another. The anti-heroes learn that due to being bonded genetically, Cable's machines recognize them as the same entity. So whenever either of them teleports, the other is along for the ride. So basically, the two are almost forced to eventually get along with each other and have a pretty cool relationship. They're kind of cool. Number 5, Cyclops and Wolverine. Wolverine has had quite the luck with the ladies over his incredibly long history, but despite that, he couldn't seem to let one girl go. That girl was Jean Grey. Jean Grey has pretty consistently declined the advances of our short, temperamental Canadian in favor of her boo, Scott Summers, the consistent leader of the X-Men, Cyclops. They just make for a better couple, despite Scott being kind of the worst sometimes. And Wolverine, he just can't stand that fact. He is pretty consistent, even to the point of being problematic with his advances towards Jean despite her constant rejection. And Cyclops is no pushover. He is, or I guess was, a Boy Scout, but he is also a pretty strong-willed leader and not someone who takes behavior like Wolverine's lightly, which has led to many clashes between the two over the years. Pretty immature rivalry over their teammate, which has gotten bloody on way too many occasions and is pretty disrespectful to the third person involved, starts as a basis, but over their history, these two have butted heads over more important things. For example, there was a pretty serious difference of opinions in how the X-Men and the students of the school they are an integral part of should be led, causing the schism story. Or there was the whole X-Men versus Avengers thing, where Wolverine seemed to choose the other heroes over his own mutant family. Number 4, Green Arrow and Arsenal. Oliver Queen and Roy Harper's falling out as one-time partners is a bit of a tragic ordeal, and it's mainly because of Roy's infamous decline into the world of substance abuse. Originally, Roy was Green Arrow's first sidekick, Speedy. He was an orphan that Oliver Queen took in. Oliver basically raised Roy. Roy would also join up with the Teen Titans, and he had a good thing going as a member of the Teen Titans, even dating Donna Troy. But a while later, the Titans disbanded, he broke up with Donna Troy, and Oliver ran into serious financial troubles and basically started neglecting Roy, going off around the country with Green Lantern and Black Canary. This was the trigger that sent him down the path of addiction. Oliver came back from a mission to find Roy red-handed, and instead of supporting or comforting his adoptive son, Oliver disowned him, kicked him out on the streets, and gave him a swift punch to the face. As you can imagine, this led to a lot of resentment between the two, and Roy struck out on his own, struggling all the while with his issues. He would go on to become Arsenal and eventually Red Arrow, with the bad blood between him and his adopted dad being smoothed over eventually, but those problems of his addiction and Green Arrow's knack for abandoning Roy came back with a vengeance. Now I gotta change the subject because it's honestly pretty depressing. Let's move on. Yeah. Number 3, Tim Drake and Damian Wayne. Of all the Robins, Tim and Damian have had the most touchy of relationships. It all started when they first met. Tim Drake was the Robin, and Damian, being the son of Batman, decided that apparently the only way to claim what he called his birthright of the Robin mantle was to literally try and take Tim's life, which is a perfect indication of why he was not at all suited to be the Robin. The little psycho. Damian laid an unholy beatdown on Tim with his much more advanced combat skills, almost bringing Tim to the pearly gates. Luckily, he didn't actually achieve this, but it set a tone for the rivalry between these two, especially as they both took on the Robin mantle. As a side note, Tim had to earn Bruce's love. He worked for it, and with his father Jack, he also had to work for that. For Tim, love is something you have to earn and is never unconditional. And this little jumped up spoiled brat comes in here talking about his birthright with Bruce actually giving Damian the love that he didn't really earn. It rubbed Tim the wrong way. Eventually, Damian claimed the Robin title solely for himself and Tim set off as just Red Robin. They've also repaired the relationship somewhat, but of the members of the Bat family, I think there is always tension between these two. Number 2, Spider-Man and Venom. Now this may seem like a cop-out because, well, it kinda is. Venom was one of Spider-Man's greatest villains, basically the literal antithesis to Spider-Man. Venom had almost an obsession for Spider-Man, like a really dangerous symbiotic ex-girlfriend. Venom almost pined for the connection he lost with Spider-Man. When the rejected alien bonded with Eddie Brock, whose life was arguably ruined by both his own and Spider-Man's actions, the combo made for a deadly villain who hated Spider-Man with almost every fiber of his being. When Venom started to lean into the role of being an anti-hero, the only real reason these two began to leave each other alone was because Venom moved across the whole country to San Francisco. I guess they just needed some space because over time they began to accept each other, becoming reluctant allies at times, especially in the Absolute Carnage story, which finally began to see the relationship heal. Eventually, in the aftermath of the King in Black story, almost seeing each other as brothers. The tension is still in the air to a degree if you ask me, and crazy exes be like that sometimes. Number 1, Emma Frost and Jean Grey. Jean Grey and Emma Frost. They are powerful female heroes amongst teams of predominantly male heroes, and they are not afraid to show just how capable they are. They are so similar and yet so different, which naturally leads to both friendship and rivalry at the same time. Emma Frost is known for being cunning, assertive, and brutally blunt. She's also no stranger to going a little dark. Jean Grey, on the other hand, is known for being more empathetic, gentle, and kind, except when she was Dark Phoenix. When they first met in the Dark Phoenix saga, Emma was literally part of the villainous Hellfire Club that manipulated Jean to become the Dark Phoenix in the first place. It is not a good way to start a working relationship. Then there is the pretty large fact that these two share a big old love triangle with Cyclops. I think it's safe to say that Cyclops prefers Jean. She is the one who is consistently stuck in his heart, but that didn't seem to stop him from basically telepathically cheating on Jean with Emma, and then actually being with Emma when him and Jean broke up and Jean died. But like I said, Jean was always in his heart, which doomed him and Emma from the start. Emma Frost and Jean Grey have continuously argued and battled over a wide array of issues throughout their history, but at the end of the day, these two women are actually friends. Friends that have genuine respect for each other and who have had each other's back. They even teamed up together to save Aurora Monroe, Storm, at one point, which displayed both their strengths and weaknesses as incredibly similar but starkly different mutants.
Number 10, Wonder Man. I mean, Wonder Man was literally the guy to organize the Avengers team. This happened because Wonder Man, aka Simon Williams, believed after years and years of having a rough go, to put it lightly, that the Avengers were actually to blame for pretty much all the negative parts of his life. He decided ultimately that the Avengers had to be stopped and put a team together known as the Revengers. The Revengers were literally created to take out the Avengers, and they almost succeeded too. At first, Wonder Man's Revengers attacked the New Avengers team. While initially the New Avengers held their own, ultimately the Revengers prevailed and actually won that fight. Confident in their ability, the Revengers then headed for the main Avenger team. This is where they ended up failing, with Wonder Man being imprisoned while in his ionic form. Let's also not forget that Wonder Man was initially introduced as a supervillain, who himself fought against the Avengers to begin with, so he also literally started out as an antagonist to them, albeit one who was eventually redeemed and ended up ultimately joining the team he had been sent to destroy. But, you know, he's got a long history with them. Number 9, Young Avengers. Hate might be a strong word here considering that the Young Avengers, you know, are inspired by the main Avengers team, but you can't deny that the Young Avengers at least have some beef with the team that inspired them. At least, you know, they did when they first formed. The Young Avengers, as inspiring teen heroes, actually wanted to learn from their mentors and sought to be trained by them, actually reaching out to the Avengers. However, when they tried to reach out to, you know, get training and get some help and pointers, they ended up being turned away, with Captain America actually refusing to teach them anything initially, and even attempting to discourage their attempt to become heroes. In fact, initially the Avengers even tried to prevent the Young Avengers from facing Kang, and even sided with Kang against the Young Avengers member Iron Lad. Kang had in essence shown the Avengers Avengers some awful visions of the potential future, were Iron Lad not to fulfill his destiny in becoming Kang, and the Avengers were basically convinced by this. Fortunately, the young Avengers weren't so easy to lock away, so they managed to escape confinement and prepare for the battle against Kang. Although Iron Lad would ultimately return to his own timeline, resigned to become Kang one day. Times have changed and the young Avengers have largely become accepted by the Avengers who came before, but the start there, it was kinda rocky. Number 8. Hulkling. During the beginning of Empire, you could definitely argue that Hulkling kinda hated the Avengers, at least for a moment, considering that they were siding with the Alliance's enemies, the Kotati. However, once the Avengers learned the truth of the Kotati's plans and their vendetta to, in essence, destroy all organic life, it became clear to them that the Alliance were actually more the side to ally with in this intergalactic fight. In fact, the whole reason that Hulkling had in essence been able to bring together the long-warring empires of both the Skrull and the Kree to create the Alliance, other than, his parentage being a Kree-Skrull hybrid, born both of Skrull royalty and a celebrated Kree war hero, was because of this unified threat, the Kotati. Number 7. Spider-Man. While Spider-Man has himself been an Avenger, that doesn't mean he's always seen eye to eye with the team or always gotten along with them. In fact, at one point they kind of betrayed his trust, or at least, one of them did. Yep, I'm talking about Iron Man during Civil War, the first Civil War, baby. It was during Civil War that Spider-Man was convinced by Tony Stark to reveal his true identity to the world as part of a push for the Superhuman Registration Act, revealing that Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, stood with Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, and supported the act. Stark believed that for accountability's sake, it was actually really important to reveal their civilian identities to the public. Of course, this almost immediately backfired, with a hit being put out on Peter, and after an attack on his life went wrong, Aunt May ending up in critical care. It would ultimately be Peter's choice to side with Avenger Tony Stark that would result in Mary Jane and himself making a deal with Mephisto to restore Peter's secret identity and save Aunt May in exchange for their marriage. So yeah. Number 6. Eternals. The Eternals and Avengers both seem to have beef with each other when the two teams clashed in AXE, which, for those who are unfamiliar, was the summer to winter event of 2022. Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals, or AXE, or AXE. Judgment Day. Here, the X-Men were being attacked by the race known as the Eternals, who were now being led by the manipulative Druig. To combat this, some members of the Eternals team sought to bring back one of their gods, the Celestials, in the hopes that, the Celestial would right all the chaos going on and basically punish Druig. They kidnapped Tony Stark and worked with him to resurrect a fallen Celestial, essentially breathing new life into it and creating kind of a new Celestial altogether. Iron Man agreed to help, but based the nervous system off his own, and ultimately when the progenitor woke and came online, it gave the entire Earth 24 hours to prove that they were worthy of life. The Eternals and the X-Men then both kinda looked at Tony and, kinda blamed him for this in part. He did base it off of himself, so yikes. Number 5. Emma Frost. Emma Frost definitely is more inclined to give the Avengers the cold shoulder from time to time. To her, they deserve it. Emma's posed question when it comes to the Avengers and their relationship to mutant kind and the X-Men is, what have you done for us lately? Despite her and Tony Stark even having had an established on and off again romance between them, she has no qualms with also grilling him on why he and the Avengers team have never been around when mutants needed them most, like, during the tragedy in Genosha. Like many mutants, Emma is left wondering why the Avengers haven't used, the fact that they're loved and celebrated the world over to stand with mutants and actively attempt to lift them up in the public eye and help fight against everyone that hates them. Tony's response to Emma's line of questioning is to point out that, the Avengers have also had a hard time when it comes to their being accepted by the world, but Emma, she isn't buying it. And to be fair, mutant-based heroes have traditionally had it, I think, a lot harder in comparison to human-based heroes, so I think I stand with Emma on this one. Number 4. Beast. Beast is having a wild time in his life right now in the comics. Oh, Hank, what happened to you? He is in essence Dark Beast, but what if Dark Beast simply existed in the main continuity, because we know Dark Beast is dead, so this can't be Dark Beast, sadly. We can't explain it away. Recently, Beast created his own Council of Beasts, and every time I see him do just about anything in the comments lately, I question if he is still sane and isn't somehow losing his mind. Beast is currently the head of X-Force, which seems to have made him extremely paranoid against anything that isn't actively advertising itself as being very, very pro-mutant, which is where the Avengers come in. They have never really been actively pro-mutant, I would say, although at times they have worked to try and better understand their friends the X-Men and have even stood with mutants and sometimes been an ally. They have also though done things to, in a roundabout way, kinda harm mutants, or at least, haven't always been there when mutant kind really could have used some help from the heroes. So whether or not they are on Beast's strike list, they are most likely a team that he would not care for. And honestly, even some of the folks Beast does seem to care for, or has cared for in the past at least, have seemingly popped up on his strike list of late. So just based on that, it's not looking good for the Avengers standing with Hank. Number 3, Daredevil. Currently in the comics, Daredevil is the one with a target on his back when it comes to the hero the Avengers are currently going after. And get this, the reason they want to bring Daredevil to justice is because he's trying to reform villains. Like, wait, what? Apparently we can chalk this feud up to a misunderstanding where so many hero versus hero conflicts obviously come from. The Avengers have simply assumed that Daredevil is looking to build up a villain army, as opposed to, simply talking to him and seeing that Matt Murdock is in fact just trying to give villains a second chance. It's not a villain army, and it's actually trying to turn them into heroes, which you'd think the Avengers would kinda be all for, because it just helps everyone. If only they simply were willing to sit down and have a conversation, instead of jumping to conclusions. But obviously, they can't do that, because comics. Number 2, The Punisher. Frank Castle and the Avengers have had a rocky relationship throughout the years, and when you look at both their differing philosophies on heroism and their approaches to it, kinda makes sense. To the Avengers, Frank Castle tends to go too far. For the Punisher, there are many times when the Avengers simply don't go far enough, and it actually came to a point where the Avengers were hunting Frank and trying to capture him in Punisher Warzone. They even succeeded with Iron Man putting him in his own separate cell where he was kept a safe distance away from all other prisoners at all times, because Tony knew if Frank felt he had a chance, he would kill the criminals he was locked up with, which, to be fair to Tony, he probably would. Number 1, X-Men. The X-Men hate the Avengers because while the Avengers also get a lot of flack sometimes for things, for the most part they can't really relate when it comes to what it's like to deal with all the hate that the X-Men and mutant kind just get for, well, being themselves and existing. Overall, the world loves the Avengers, but overall the world tends to hate or judge the X-Men just because they're mutants, even though the X-Men have saved the world like multiple times. The differences between the two and just how much the Avengers didn't really get what was going on for the X-Men was highlighted during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, also known as AVX. Although at least out of that we got the Uncanny Avengers, which was a team that Captain America put together in the hopes of mending the relationship between the two teams, which kinda worked, I think.
Coming in at number 10 is Deadpool. Deadpool is a bit of a shocking way to kick off this list. He himself is like almost a mutant, but not actually a mutant, but he also says he's a mutant, but is then corrected by the actual mutants, and then sometimes people classify him as a mutant, but then others will classify him as not one. Do you understand why it's a little confusing? His mutant healing factor was derived from Wolverine's own, and he became who he is thanks to Weapon X, which are notorious for working on mutants. But whether he is a mutant or not, one thing is definitely true. Despite the fact that Wade has tried to count himself among their numbers, Deadpool finds the X-Men to just be a little too annoying for his own tastes. And that feeling basically just stems from the fact that they take things way too seriously, where he takes almost nothing seriously, which means when he does work with them, it's usually not for a very long time. To say Deadpool hates anyone feels kind of wrong. I think he's just kind of insane, but he definitely finds them annoying. Number 9, Black Bolt. The Inhumans are essentially a species of mutants created by the Kree experimenting on humans a long time ago. One of the ways the Inhumans came to be was through the Terrigen Mists. When they're exposed to the mists, they gained powers and they would become an Inhuman. Unfortunately, a cloud of Terrigen Mists found its way to Earth, and it turns out that these mists are incredibly deadly for the mutant population. The mutants eventually learned that they could change the composition of the mist in order to make it safe for mutants, but at the cost of not creating more Inhumans. The problem is, it didn't actually make sure that was okay to do with the Inhumans. They just started attacking the Inhumans, causing a conflict and causing Black Bolt to use his Scream to take down Cyclops. This resulted in Emma Frost using Dazzler to attack attack Black Bolt and leave him imprisoned in limbo and without the ability to use his powers. The worst part is that if the X-Men just talked to the Inhumans, which they eventually do, the Inhumans are totally cool with figuring out a resolution. So I'm kind of on Black Bolt's side with this one. Look, I definitely know some of these choices will split people's opinions, so this is a perfect opportunity to invite you down to the comments to make sure you let me know your thoughts on my opinions here. I'm giving you my takes with examples, so I'd love to hear your well-informed opinions. Coming in at number 8 is Blade. Blade is someone who sometimes feels like he's relegated to his own corner of the Marvel Universe, a fact that he and mutants technically kind of share. But Blade is also pretty damn ruthless. His main self-appointed purpose in life is to eradicate vampires. It's what he lives for. But when one of those vampires is also a mutant, then it causes some discourse. During the X-Men Curse of the Mutants, the X-Men, and more specifically Cyclops, asked this vampire slayer for his expertise and assistance in dealing with their vampire problem. When the depowered mutant Jubilee was turned into a vampire though, Blade wanted to exterminate her, straight up, which shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. But Blade also shouldn't have been surprised that the X-Men were not down for this course of action. The disagreement may not have been Blade hates the X-Men, but going to a vampire slayer and expecting him not to do what he does is a little annoying, don't you think? I think so. Number 7, Wasp. Look, you may not agree with me on this one, and that's fine. But I will source one point of evidence that Wasp does not have a favorable view of the X-Men and mutants in general. In Uncanny Avengers, which followed the X-Men vs. Avengers arc and ended with the passing of Xavier at the hands of Cyclops, Captain America decided that the best way to repair things was to put more mutants onto the Avengers and have the new team, led by Alex Summers, Havoc. That's Cap cherry-picking the best-looking mutants to represent them, but the addition of a few mutants to the Avengers under the ideology of a Professor X meant that some things changed around the Avengers mansion. Like when Rogue tried to replace a painting of the original Avengers with a painting of Xavier. It's in a bit of poor taste, sure, but when Wasp walked in on it happening, she was more than a little upset. And it seemed genuinely anti-mutant to me, just a little bit. And then she had this whole weird thing where she tried to design an X-Men themed clothing brand, including Cyclops themed glasses that seemed in poor taste, to help fund the Avengers. And she referred to UX types as being depressing and not optimistic. Then in issue number 8 of that series, she makes another comment about the quote X-Men types and how they are keeping secrets. She just makes all these little snide comments about the mutant members of the team. She definitely has some kind of hate going on here. I don't care what you say, it's true. Wasp acts like all mutants are superheroes, for sure, but superheroes who don't know what they're doing, and that's rude. Number 6, Captain America. Captain America does not hate mutants. He stands against inequality, it's one of his things, fighting for the little guy. But gosh darn it, he sure seems to not care about them or their cause. Captain America and the Avengers in general don't usually think of the whole race of mutants when they make decisions, and that often leads to catastrophic events. A prime example being Avengers vs. X-Men. The X-Men knew from the very beginning that the Phoenix Force was coming to join with Hope Summers to revive the mutant species, and that if it didn't find Hope, it would destroy the Earth. They knew this because the mutant Cable went to the future, where the Avengers had succeeded in quote protecting Hope from the Phoenix Force, and it was bad. Cyclops made this pretty clear to Captain America and the Avengers, but they didn't trust the X-Men, this group of powerful mutants with decades of experience with the Phoenix Force, and who have hosts of the Phoenix Force among their ranks. The subconscious anti-mutant prejudice that Cap holds, coupled with his self-righteousness, causes him to not trust mutants and to think that he knows better than them. It's subtle for sure, but it's there all the same. Captain America has been at the center of many debates due to his willful negligence in regards to the mutant struggle. He doesn't hate mutants, but he also takes no noticeable action in their favor, nor does he like it when the X-Men threaten to overturn the current peace, even if it's for the betterment of their own species. But he does create the Unity Squad, so there's that. Number 5, Hawkeye. Look, Hawkeye is kinda just a bit of a jerk to everyone. And it makes a tiny bit of sense since he's constantly playing the compensation game with everyone else, since he's just a guy with a bow and an arrow. But man, does he say some problematic anti-mutant garbage sometimes. In Secret Wars, for example, without showing any anti-mutant sentiment before, Hawkeye grabs Cyclops by the scruff of his shirt and screams in his face, "You mutants stick together, huh? Well, sticking to a blood-soaked maniac like him doesn't speak well of you, pal." He was referring to Magneto, and well, fair point, Hawkeye, but what's all this "you mutants" talk? Look, I'm reaching for this one for sure, but in the Ultimate Universe, this sentiment is actually a bit more noticeable, and Hawkeye is certainly more of a jerk in general there. And he even took glee in taking out multiples of Multiple Man. Although, that was most likely because he was grieving. Look, just let me have this one, okay? Number 4, Scarlet Witch. The Scarlet Witch is another unique choice for this list, as she herself is indeed a mutant. But it's the fact that she is a mutant that is why she is on this list in the first place. It is a gross understatement to say that Wanda has not had the easiest life. Being an Avenger for years, the team that she has always been more inclined to anyways, this mutant saved the world on many occasions, but the end of the Scarlet Witch's marriage to Vision and the loss of her children caused a mental breakdown. A breakdown that, coupled with her reality warping capabilities, caused the passing of a number of Avengers. Once the heroes decided that she needed to be dealt with, she warped reality to a world where Magneto was in charge of everything. But in the climax of that story, Wanda, in an extremely emotional moment, basically revealed her hate for mutants stemmed from the fact that being one has caused her so much pain and grief. She hated herself for being a mutant, and with 3 words, she then relieved almost all the mutants on Earth of their mutant abilities, putting the entire race into endangerment. Number 3, Tony Stark. Tony Stark, Iron Man, is on this list for an extremely similar reason to Captain America. As one of the leading men in the non-mutant superhero community, he makes some rather interesting decisions with some pretty selfish intent. Just like Captain America, I wouldn't say that Tony hates mutants or the X-Men, but I would say that he is usually ignorant to the horror which the X-Men have had to endure solely for being born different. For Tony, his example of not caring comes from the superhuman Civil War. Iron Man attempted to recruit the X-Men during Civil War, and Emma Frost rightly pointed out that the Avengers did absolutely nothing when Genosha was attacked by the Sentinels. 16 million mutants passed away, and the other heroes, Iron Man included, were almost nowhere to be found. But the bigger elephant in the room is that the act that Tony is even supporting in his Civil War is the Superhuman Registration Act, which itself was just an evolution of the Mutant Registration Act that purposefully segregated mutants for being who they were born to be. Tony didn't really care about that. He cared about having powerful pawns on his side. He would rather have them on his side since they are useful to keep around, but he doesn't actually care about their struggle, and he doesn't even fully trust them. Also, an imposter Tony Stark called them all filthy muties once, so there's that. Number 2, Reed Richards. Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is not overtly a mutant or X-Men hater. The Fantastic Four that he is arguably the leader of have done their time and earned their place among the whole superhuman community, including among the mutants, as the Fantastic Four were one of the few groups who actively showed support of mutants, even if they didn't really know the best way to do so. But despite that, when things get personal, people's true colors come out for all to see. Reed may have not overtly said he hates mutants, but when it was revealed that Franklin Richards, his son, was actually a mutant, Reed then implanted a mutant nullifier into his own kid. He tried to fix Franklin despite the fact that he didn't try to do that when Franklin was not a mutant. I'd say that is pretty highly suspicious, and Susan Richards would probably agree with me. The people of the internet think this may have played a part in her trying to shack up with Namor. The worst part is Franklin wasn't actually a mutant. He just subconsciously used his vast powers to give himself an X gene. Reed needs to check himself. And finally, in at number 1, the Eternals. This may be a bit of an interesting choice. The hate for the X-Men here is almost an involuntary thing. So the Eternals, a celestial created experiment and offshoot of humanity, have an eternal struggle against another offshoot, the Deviants. Eternals have hardwired programming to protect the Celestials and to correct access deviation. A recent revelation about mutants and deviants causes the new Eternal leader, a pretty sinister guy by the name of Druig, to decide that the mutants represented excess deviation. Thanks to that, war is declared on all mutants, including obviously the X-Men. Following their programming, Eternal assassins come to Krakoa to destroy the Five. Massive war machine Eternals called the Hex are unleashed on Krakoa. Uranos, one of the oldest and nastiest of the Eternals, is unleashed on Arakko, and millions of mutants are taken out by the Eternals and their war machines. Now, to be totally fair, not all Eternals are on board with that. The main heroic Eternals like Thena and Icarus and Ajak and Makari split themselves off as separate Eternal factions trying to fix the situation, and when it reaches its crazy huge penultimate climax, things do go back to a bit of a normalcy, but for a while, their Eternals tried to wipe out the mutants simply for existing.
Number 10. Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl. Now normally I would say these two actually really love each other, but today we're talking about rivalries, and there was a time when Diana Prince and Donna Troy actually had some beef. This happened actually before the two young women even really knew about it themselves. You see, in the Prime Earth continuity during the New 52 reboot, Donna was given a new backstory. I know, another new backstory. Well, her backstory initially seemed familiar to readers, with her being a child that Wonder Woman had once saved and brought back to Themyscira to be raised among the Amazons. The truth in this continuity was that Donna was actually created by Darino for the sole purpose of defeating Diana as a way of getting back at Hippolyta, her ex-lover. Darino in the comics has the appearance of an old crone because her youth was stolen away by Hecate's magics, which Darino confronted when defending Hippolyta. If that's not enough of a conflict for you between Wonder Woman and the formerly known Wonder Girl, who was in essence like Diana's adopted kid sister, we've also met Thea in the comics, which is an alternate future version of Donna who rules the world after killing all her friends, Wonder Woman included. Donna confronted this evil future version of herself in the third volume of Titans in issue number 17.
Number 9. Hal Jordan and his brother, Jack. Hal Jordan's father, Martin, was a test pilot for a Ferris aircraft until one day he crashed his plane and died. He left behind a wife named Jessica, as well as his sons Hal and Jack. The event was so traumatic that Jessica made her sons promise not to follow in their father's footsteps. Jack respected his mother's wishes and became Coast City's district attorney. Hal, on the other hand, felt the need for speed. More specifically, the need to break his promise to his mommy and become a test pilot. Jack believed that the stress of this caused their mother to die early, and he never forgave Hal for breaking his promise. Hal would eventually become Green Lantern and would often work alongside Jack while fighting crime, but the two would never really come to terms together, and Jack eventually died in a car crash. Womp womp.
Number 8. The Summers Brothers. While the Summers Brothers have stood together in the past, they've also been quite divided as well. For this point, we're focusing on Scott, Alex, and Gabriel, aka Cyclops, Havoc, and Vulcan. With Vulcan, it's pretty easy to discuss the hatred his brothers have felt in the past, because when you think about it, Vulcan kind of came back to attack the X-Men and get revenge for what had happened to him and his team in the past when they attempted to rescue the first X-Men team. However, that being said, while initially Scott and Gabriel were not on friendly terms, when Scott learned the truth of who Vulcan really was to him, a brother, and that Vulcan had, unbeknownst to Scott, had been part of the team that attempted to rescue him and the other X-Men from dread sentient mutant island known as Krakoa, Scott ended up more wanting to reach out to Vulcan as opposed to fighting against him. Havoc and Psyche also have their differences. At one point, Cyclops left his wife Madeline Pryor, prompting Havoc to step in and be there for Maddie, ultimately developing his own romantic relationship with his brother's wife, so that's kinda complicated. With years of comic history between them and powers all based in a similar mutant power set, it's easy to see how sometimes the Summers brothers all struggle to get along with one another.
Number 7. North Star and Aurora. Jean-Marie and Jean-Paul Barbier were separated early in life when their parents died in a car accident. Jean-Paul ended up in foster homes before eventually becoming an Olympic skier, while Jean-Marie ended up at a strict Catholic girls' boarding school, which was so traumatic that she ended up developing dissociative identity disorder, creating an alternate personality known as Aurora. They have a pretty rocky relationship with North Star, often coming into conflict with his sister's different personalities. So he's not fond of her Jean-Marie personality, who is ashamed of her mutant powers and due to her religious upbringing is unaccepting of her brother being a gay man. On the other hand, her much freer Aurora personality doesn't like North Star because he commented on her relationship with Walter Lankowski and implied that she was a loose woman. The result of this was that one of her personas refused to talk to him, but the other was constantly needing support but being unaccepting of his lifestyle. They eventually buried the hatchet, but there was a huge chunk of their lives where they were constantly at odds.
Number 6. Jimmy Hudson and Quicksilver. This might seem like a weird thing to have on here since most people only know Quicksilver and his sister, Scarlet Witch, and maybe their other half-sister Polaris. But did you know that Quicksilver has a brother too? In the ultimate reality, that is. Here, Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine and Magneto's wife, Magda Lencher. Magda and Wolverine get together and Jimmy is born as a result. Quicksilver, on the other hand, is believed to be the son of Magneto and Magda, although it's also kind of implied that he might even be Wolverine's son, but that's a matter for another video. While Quicksilver had fought to protect Jimmy's life on a few occasions, this wouldn't stop the two from fighting one another viciously when Jimmy refused to go along with Quicksilver's master plan, and Jimmy's part in it. Magda, however, arrives to prevent her two sons from killing each other just in time.
Number 5. Barry Allen and Cobalt Blue. Barry Allen was an ordinary man until he was struck by lightning and doused with chemicals that granted him super speed, allowing him to become the Flash. But he is actually not an only child. On the night that Barry was born, his mother Nora gave birth to another little boy. At the same time, another woman named Charlene Thawne was also in labor. The attending physician was drunk and had sent his nurse home for the night and was unable to save Thawne's child when he got tangled in the umbilical cord. The doctor's solution to this was to take Barry's twin from the Allens and tell them that he had been stillborn. He gave Malcolm to the Thawne family, who raised him as one of their own. Malcolm's adoptive family was kinda sketchy, as they had a power called the Blue Flame, which they used to heal people before selling them fake cures as a con. As he was adopted, he did not have this power, something for which his other family members constantly taunted him about. Malcolm found out that he was adoptive and set off to find his real family. He began stalking Barry, even witnessing the accident that turned him into the Flash. He became jealous that Barry had everything Malcolm thought that he deserved and grew to hate Barry. He learned a way to use the Thawne Blue Flame power despite being adopted and became one of the Flash's villains, Cobalt Blue.
Number 4. Professor Xavier and Juggernaut. Professor Xavier, while having done some not so great things in his life, is still, for all intents and purposes, mainly considered a superhero. And honestly, while we'll be focusing more on the time here when Juggernaut was a supervillain, even he in the comics seems to have turned over somewhat of a new leaf, moving more into being an anti-hero, if not like a full-on superhero himself, I would say. Juggernaut was given his powers initially by Sidorak, and while he has moved away from this god in the present day in terms of acting as his avatar, Juggernaut was at one point acting as such, with his powers intrinsically tied to Sidorak. Because of his alignment and because of years of history between the two, Professor X and Juggernaut would always butt heads whenever they met up, often even fighting against each other. If not always directly, many times indirectly at the very least. Even when Juggernaut became more of a heroic figure, Xavier was still wary of letting him on the mutant island of Krakoa, because despite being family, albeit step-family, Xavier still didn't want Kane around. And he used the excuse that he wasn't a mutant. Harsh. Fortunately, the two have continuously over the years been moving towards a healthier and healthier relationship. So here's hoping that continues to grow between them and they don't hate each other so much anymore.
Number 3. Martian Manhunter and Malefic. Alien space cop John Jones was born on the planet Mars, where he lived with his wife and daughter. Like all Martians, John had the power to psychically communicate with other members of his species, but his twin brother Malefic was born a mutant who didn't possess this ability. As the years passed, Malefic became more and more resentful and hateful of Martian culture and started devising a plan to end the race. John's idyllic life came to an end when Malefic created a virus that made the Martians burst into flame when they used their psychic powers, resulting in the death of everyone on the planet except John and Malefic. When a scientist on Earth attempted to make contact with Mars with the use of a transmitter, it instead transported John to Earth, where he became the superhero Martian Manhunter. Malefic remained on Mars, living in the ruins, until he learned that his brother was alive on Earth, causing him to set out to try and finish his extinction of the Martian species. Malefic hates John because he hates all Martians. John hates Malefic because he killed everyone John ever knew and loved. Fair enough.
Number 2. Aquaman and Ocean Master. No matter what the continuity, these two have always been brothers in the comics, and they have also always hated one another. Back in the day, the feud between the two happened because Orin, aka Arthur, got everything as a result of his birth, whereas Orm got nothing, Orm being Ocean Master. Because of this, Orm would end up seeking out powers based in magic so that he could finally triumph over his brother. Ha! Take that, Aquaman, I got magic powers. That's me being Ocean Master. In the current continuity, Ocean Master felt that Arthur would not be a good king for Atlantis and sought to prevent him from taking the throne. Arthur here is the firstborn to the princess and future queen Atlanna. Here he was raised on land, whereas Orm, his half-brother, is the son of Orvax Marius, king of Atlantis, and queen Atlanta. And of course being raised, underwater, so he's more about that life. Being more of Atlantis initially than Arthur was, it would make sense that Ocean Master would hate Arthur, who spent most of his life initially living on the surface world.
Number 1. Thor and Loki. Okay, you all know the gist of this one. Loki was born to the king and queen of the giants of Jotunheim, but due to him not being a giant, he was shamed by his society. Loki used some really elaborate time travel shenanigans in order to orchestrate the death of his father and his adoption by Odin of Asgard. He was taken to Asgard, but soon became jealous of his new brother, Thor, who was clearly favored over him by the citizens of Asgard. This got to a new level when he became jealous of Thor's relationship with Lady Sif. Loki spent several years trying to defeat Thor, either directly or through more convoluted means, like granting a prisoner absorption powers so he could become the Absorbing Man to fight Thor. The two have had moments of getting along over the years, but more often than not, these brothers find themselves in spectacular combat, with Loki continuously attacking Earth simply because he knows Thor has a soft spot for it.